Welcome, welcome. Come on in. It is so wonderful to see you all here. I hope you enjoyed dinner. How do we like the new caterer? How are we feeling about the new caterer? Good? Good? Heard some clapping, heard some tepid response. All right. Beautiful. So it is a pleasure to have you here as we are observing the fourth annual Repro Shabbat. And so I'd love to hear first from Abby and Meredith to kick us off, and then we'll head into our conversation with Sapna. And I'm so excited to have you here, and we'll dive in just a moment. But you guys get a mic. Here you go.
Can everyone hear? Yeah. Hi, everyone. For those of you that don't know us, I'm Abigail Posner. This is Meredith Ross, and we're the co-chairs of the Congregants for Reproductive Justice. I'll talk closer. Is that better? Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us for this exciting program tonight. We're thrilled to welcome Sapna Khatri, the director of the Attorney General's newly created Reproductive Justice Unit. Rabbi Harper will first share an introduction about Sapna, and then they'll sit down for a conversation. They're already sitting, but they will have a conversation about her important work as well as timely issues in the realm of reproductive health and justice. We'll have time at the end for a question and answer period from everyone, both in person and on Zoom, followed by final thoughts from Sapna. Please note that tonight is also the launch of our second Havilat Tipol post-abortion care package project. Last year, TBE created this program with our partner HealthQ, a sexual health clinic in Lawrence, Mass. We're excited to have Christy Monast and Amiel Evans from HealthQ in attendance. At the end of Sapna's program, yay, they're right over there, they'll address how well the program was received by their patients last year.
Thank you to our committee, and especially Edith Scandelman, I'm not sure where she is, and to Edith for all the work you've put into this evening. A heartfelt thank you to Rabbi Harper for your participation, and to Jess Friedman for your support. Is that everybody? I feel like I'm forgetting somebody. Okay, to continue growing this CRJ, we would love for more people to join us. We say this all the time, but we really need people to join us and help bring even more programming to the congregation. We need more ideas, though we have a lot that we already can't fulfill. So please, please join us. Reach out. And also, as you leave, there'll be a poster board outside that we've assembled a bunch of papers which highlight various resources in reproductive justice, different ways to get involved and stay informed. Thank you so much for coming, and enjoy the evening.
Right. Abby and Meredith, thank you so much for your leadership and all that you have done to guide our young committee in doing all this incredible work so far. We are so grateful, Sapna, that you have joined us this evening. Thank you for being here for services as well and for dinner. And we're excited to get to learn a little bit more about the work that you're doing. So a little bit of background. Sapna Khatri is the director of the Massachusetts Attorney General's Reproductive Justice Unit. She is leading this new unit as it focuses on ensuring that Massachusetts remains a national leader on reproductive justice matters. Prior to joining the Massachusetts Attorney General's office, Sapna worked as a Sears Clinical Teaching Fellow at UCLA, where she launched the school's inaugural Reproductive Justice Externship Program. And she also led efforts to establish the nation's first medical legal partnership at a Planned Parenthood clinic in partnership with the UCLA Law Center on Reproductive Health Law and Policy, the Black Health Initiative at Planned Parenthood Inglewood, and the Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles. Preceding her time at UCLA, Sapna served as a law fellow in the Women and Reproductive Rights Project at the ACLU of Illinois, and later as the organization's Advocacy and Policy Council for Privacy, Technology, and Surveillance Matters. So we are so grateful that you are joining us here at TBE tonight, and it sounds like you are doing really cool work in a really cool new department that I did not know existed. And so I'd love to hear a little bit more about what your department's mission is within the Attorney General's office and what your role is as the director. Like, what is your department trying to do? What are your missions and goals?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you everyone for sticking around and for having me. Can you hear me okay at this volume? Yes, beautiful, great. So as mentioned, the Reproductive Justice Unit is in the Attorney General's office. It is brand new. You are looking at the entire unit right now, so it is a team of one. But I have the privilege to be able to work alongside attorneys and advocates across divisions within the office. So the office of 600 people that are at the Attorney General's office is my support team. So I do have that benefit. But the unit itself is really something that comes from the vision of the Attorney General. So Attorney General Campbell, throughout her campaigning, promised Massachusetts that when she comes into office, she's going to establish a unit dedicated to reproductive justice. That's a really critical piece, that it's a reproductive justice unit. We are the first unit in the nation that's in an AG's office that is RJ focused. There are others that are now doing RJ work. They did not previously. And I make this distinction just because reproductive justice is rooted in a movement that centers intersectionality. It recognizes that we all live intersectional lives. We have different barriers that stand in our way in determining if we want to have children, when we have them, and how we want to raise them in safe and sustainable environments. That's a little bit distinct from the traditional reproductive rights movement, which is what a lot of other reproductive rights legal organizations tend to lean into. Reproductive justice movements and reproductive justice organizations take a community-informed approach to do their work. So that's exactly what I'm trying to do now with the RJU. We take a community-informed approach, meaning that I'm spending a lot of my time committing to getting to know community members, which is why I'm so grateful to be here and in community with you guys today. And thank you for letting me join your service to see just what a beautiful environment you all can create and just how supportive this community is. I'm new to Massachusetts. I did not feel so new today, so thank you for that. And we want to make sure that all the work that the unit does is built from the work that you all are doing and that the community is doing. And it's a range of advocacy work, policy work. Shout out to Rep. K. Khan, who has several amazing RJ bills, which I'm going to talk about a little bit, but doing policy work and supporting legislation, and then some litigation and investigation we'll dive into. But I'm grateful to work in a state that is protective, but there's still a lot of work to be done. So that's what the unit is zeroing in on, to make sure that access exists and that it's meaningful access. People don't have to worry about their finances when accessing their care and raising their children.
Beautiful, thank you. So you mentioned a difference between reproductive justice and reproductive rights. Can you expand a little bit on what exactly reproductive justice means and how your department defines that, and also what kind of work within the sphere of reproductive justice you're pursuing?
Yeah, absolutely. So reproductive justice goes back to a movement that was developed in the 1990s. So that term specifically was coined by bringing together social justice, human rights, and the reproductive rights movement by using a human rights framework. This is a little bit different because it recognized that you can't just have the conversation about reproductive health if you just talk about abortion care, because there's so much more to someone's reproductive health, their bodily autonomy that's attached to it that doesn't just come from abortion care. And I think we heard a lot of that earlier today with the speaker during the services that really showcases that reproductive health care there's a spectrum to it. There's different aspects where you're trying to access this care. And beyond that, we have other impacts, other issues and systemic barriers that stand in our way in our lives. Reproductive justice wanted to make sure that we keep that in mind when advocating for change, when organizing for change. So a reproductive justice organization really wants to, like I mentioned, be community-centered and wants to kind of identify the issues that it focuses on based on the needs of the community. To that end, I do have a one-pager that I'm happy to hand out to folks that kind of highlight some of these issues, but the way that we've built it out is based on some of the analysis we're doing so far, some of the community outreach we've done. We've identified 6 or 7 different issue areas that seem to just bubble up to the top as the most pressing, either based on the interest of folks that are in Massachusetts or just what we're seeing in terms of issues that keep coming up based on community members' insights. We're doing that in a very mindful way with that reproductive kind of justice theory in mind. Those issues include abortion access, which is what brings us, a lot of us here today, but just in light of the Dobbs decision, we have to focus on abortion access because our neighbors in other states do not have the same access as we do. And we're facing providers who are putting themselves in a vulnerable position to provide care to folks that are coming from out of state. So protecting them and making sure abortion remains accessible is a top priority. Crisis pregnancy centers, for those that have heard of them, for those that have not, I'm sorry to ruin your night, but these are the fake pregnancy centers that really like to spread misinformation, often misdiagnose if they have medical staff, and provide medical services, though they usually do not, and focus a religious agenda to keep people from being able to access much needed reproductive health care. Trying to figure out a way to hold them accountable is another big issue area because these crisis pregnancy centers are situated very, very close to, if not right next to, or in the same building as abortion clinics. We'll talk more about them in a little bit, so we're not done with CPCs, but that's another priority area. Maternal health care, making sure that birthing people who want to give birth are able to do so in safe environments, environments of their choosing, in communities of their choosing, and that they're able to thrive in that environment, and so are their children. So maternal health is a big priority for us. In addition to that, sex education. We want to make sure our students are able to understand and our young people are armed with the information to be able to make thoughtful decisions about their sexual lives and their reproductive lives, so ensuring that sex ed is provided. Infertility access is something that we're trying to focus on, and then I'm trying to remember what else I'm missing. There's a couple other areas that we're also looking at, but the range of these different projects all come back to what does the community in Massachusetts need? And we're trying to make sure that we're doing this work by extending out and doing outreach across different parts of the state. So I mentioned to some folks I'm trying to plan a convening in Western Mass, and it's turning out to be a much bigger challenge than I expected, because coming from California, I'm like, this is a small state. It won't be hard. I could easily get to Western Mass. Boy, was I wrong. It is definitely difficult and a challenge, but we need to be there. We have folks that are providing great services and folks that need access to healthcare. So we want to make sure we're able to go and meet them where they are, learn about what the issues are, and make sure we're able to help address those needs, and doing this with that RJ lens of intersectionality and really understanding what other barriers exist. Childcare, work within the family regulatory system, work within the criminal legal system. All of these touch points are reproductive justice. I always say to anyone I'm meeting for the first time, every issue is an RJ issue, because ultimately every issue touches on our ability to make reproductive health decisions. So we're trying to work with our environmental care division to learn more about what issues they're seeing. We're working with our criminal team to understand what's happening there. I have a background in privacy, so I always try to bring that perspective and understand the lack of privacy protections we have. How can we make them robust in a way that also protects reproductive health care and reproductive access? So those are just kind of an idea, and like I said, I'll hand out the one-pager so you can see some of the issue areas, but it's definitely not exhaustive. It's an ever-growing list, and me as a team of one is trying to do as much of it as I can with the collaboration of folks like you and from folks in the office.
That's a huge agenda for one person.
Yeah,
so,
yeah. We'll make it happen. Let's chat in a year. We'll see where we are.
But just to interrupt that, just to say kol hakavod, that's a Hebrew term, like all the honor to you for taking that on and for doing all that kind of work, and how important it is to be able to think of this issue as something that's more expansive and connecting all of these different pieces, because nothing is isolated, right? All of these things, they do feed into each other in such an important way. So I'd love if you could review a little bit for us, what exactly is so within the state of Massachusetts, what is our state's position on abortion? What are some of the legal protections that are currently in place after the fall of Roe v. Wade? And what else are we doing to be able to further protect and expand access within the state?
Yeah, so I think as someone who's coming from somewhere else, I want to just acknowledge that Roe versus Wade was always never meant to be the ceiling of protections. It set a floor, and a very low floor at that. It was not doing much. It did the bare minimum and allowed states to then go further to protect abortion access. Massachusetts, I think, really heard that and did go that step further and create some protections ahead of time to recognize that just relying on Roe versus Wade is not going to be enough to maintain access to abortion. And then we've just kind of doubled down on that since the Dobbs decision where Roe fell. So in Massachusetts, access to abortion care is protected. We've had that recognized by our Supreme Court within the state. We've had that recognized by the Constitution. So that's great news. We also have supported additional efforts to make sure abortion is accessible by making sure that public funding is available for abortion access. Again, great news, and it's helpful. So it's good to be in a state that protects that access. And then that final piece of the puzzle was making sure that the providers that are providing that care, this really critical care, both to their patients within Massachusetts, but more importantly, for patients that are coming from outside of the state, that are crossing borders or that are using telehealth to be able to talk to providers in Massachusetts, to make sure those providers are safe, that their family members, their friends are safe, by enacting a SHIELD law. That SHIELD law was, we were the first state in the nation to put something like this together. Many other states have since followed, but our SHIELD law protects access to reproductive health care and sexual health care. So that includes gender-affirming care, and wants to make sure that providers that are trying to get access to this care know that they are shielded, there's the clever use of this word, shielded from any sort of criminal liability from folks conducting investigations in other states. So if you have a provider here in Massachusetts and then there's a police officer, there's an investigation, there's a DA in Texas, they're not going to be able to reach out and hold somebody accountable for being able to provide abortion care to a Texas resident. We recognize the need to build in those mechanisms. That said, definitely isn't enough, because there are still folks that do not have access to care. There are still issues in terms of leaving people vulnerable with the information that might be left behind that can help pinpoint where they went in Massachusetts to access the care that they needed. And we're still seeing whether or not this SHIELD law even works. So it's a great law, we think, that we passed. It served as a model for other states. But we have been fortunate not to see any issues yet where someone has come after a provider or is trying to investigate a provider. We're doing our part at the AG's office to work with law enforcement and to work with providers, provide trainings to both. For the providers, it's more know your rights trainings. Now that we have these abortion protections and the SHIELD law, what does this mean for you? How do you know that you're providing care, and what does it mean for you to remain safe and secure when providing that care? But then also making sure law enforcement officials understand that they cannot provide assistance or assist in an investigation from out of state. What does that look like? So we're engaging in those conversations right now to make sure that we shore up those defenses, because we never want to end up in a position where one of our physicians or providers or nurses that are providing this care are arrested. We don't want that to happen. And if they do, in the off chance that that does happen, even though it's not supposed to, we're ready to be able to come in and help make sure that we're able to take the cases beyond they go any further. So that's something that we're working on. But beyond that, independent clinic security is a big concern for us. So we're really trying to work with independent abortion clinics who maybe don't have the funding that they need quite yet. They don't have the most up-to-date security mechanisms, but they're still feeling threatened by the onslaught of restrictions and bans in other states, and then also the protesters that are standing outside of their clinic, by the CPCs that are right next door to them, making sure that folks that are going to those clinics for care and that go to those clinics to provide care feel safe. So we're working with independent clinics to help protect them in that sense. And while we have a buffer zone law, which in theory is supposed to protect abortion clinics by creating somewhat of a buffer from where the abortion clinic is and the edge of the property or something, and making sure the protesters don't cross that buffer, that isn't really the most effective way to keep protesters away, and it's not the most effective way to keep providers safe. So we're trying to look into other ways, whether that's reassessing the buffer zone, if there's something else we need to do, or if there's something else that needs to happen to make sure that independent clinics feel safe. So all in all, with all of those different pieces happening, I would say we're very fortunate to be in a state that recognizes how important abortion care is. It's protected it in the legal levels. I think there's still room to do more. I may talk about it later, but there's the Location Shield Act, which I think is a really important piece of legislation that I know several members in here have been active in and have written postcards, which is great. We're still waiting to see where this goes because it's in hold, it's waiting in review. But the Location Shield Act kind of brings in that privacy piece I mentioned, because when we have our cell phones tracking our every location and what we're doing and when we're doing it, we have to be very careful because it can very easily paint a picture of where we're going, including when we're trying to access reproductive health care. And when there's states and bad actors trying to actively keep us from getting that care and try to make an example of somebody, we have to make sure we limit the possibility of exposure for that information. So the Location Shield Act puts a ban on the commercial sale of this type of information and some additional privacy mechanisms to make sure that we're also addressing that privacy piece that previously we have not done. Massachusetts, for all the things we do well, our privacy landscape is not the strongest, so making sure that we're doing what we can to shore up those defenses as well.
And it's so important for so many different things too, in addition to its role within reproductive justice, and unfortunately something the Jewish community is pretty well acquainted with. And so that's really important work. So we know that there's a case coming up to the Supreme Court at the end of March which is about medication abortion. So I'm wondering kind of what is the status of that? What are some of the steps that are being taken to protect access to medication abortion in Massachusetts?
Yeah, before I start, in this room, do folks know medication abortion and kind of how the process works? Yeah, so I don't have to go into the background about medication too deeply? Okay, I'll do a very quick summary then, because then I'll save all of the other stuff. This is where you can tell I've taught before, because I have a very in-depth analysis of where this is, and I can truncate it. So I will do the truncated version. So medication abortion obviously changes a lot of the landscape in general for abortion access in the world we're in right now, where Roe doesn't exist. That makes it very different from the pre-Roe landscape. Because we have medication abortion, folks are still largely able to access abortion care when they need it, but there are some caveats to that, obviously depending on where you are and how far along you are in your pregnancy. Medication abortion, which the most common form is through a 2-pill regimen here in the US, uses Miffy and Miso. That's why I'm going to refer to them. I know they're pronounced differently by everyone. That is my preferred pronunciation. But you take mifepristone the first time, and then misoprostol is the one that you take after. That is the most common regimen here, and you can only take that up until 10 weeks. So that's why it's critical to know that if you find out you're pregnant later in pregnancy, or you find out that there is a fetal anomaly, or there's another issue and you need a pregnancy or an abortion later in term, even if it's at 12 weeks, you likely cannot use a medication abortion on any protocol because it will not be effective. So it doesn't completely solve our issue. If you live in Missouri and you need access to medication abortion, but you're at 12 weeks, you still need to go to Illinois to get your procedural abortion care, because you will not be able to do that within Missouri. So there's already some issues with access. But then we have this lawsuit that critically comes in to even get rid of that access that we've been able to carve out. The Alliance case was brought a couple years ago, and it was brought with the intention of ideally getting rid of the FDA regulations that permitted access to mifepristone, the first of the two medications that are involved here, without a certain number of restrictions. Couple things to note in this case. Number one is I just want to tell you a little bit about the Alliance, because it's just great when you hear about who they are, what they stand for, and you learn about the case. So the Alliance case was brought by a group of doctors and national medical associations. The Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine upholds and promotes the fundamental principles of Hippocratic medicine. These principles include protecting the vulnerable at the beginning and end of life, seeking the ultimate good for the patient with compassion and moral integrity, and providing healthcare with the highest standards of excellence based on medical science. And yet, they want to get rid of a medication that is safe, proven by decades of research, that has saved lives, and that patients want and need. Let's just understand that that's what's happening. Who's bringing the case, what they in theory stand for, and what's happening and what's at risk. Up until very recently, I would say 2019, we only had one medication that was approved by the FDA for medication, for Miffy. There was only one manufacturer who could provide mifepristone. This is Danco. Danco Laboratories is that manufacturer. That is who this case is against. In 2019, there is another manufacturer who was approved, GenBioPro. So in theory, there's a world in which GenBioPro may still be able to provide this medication, but they are not the ones that traditionally provide it. They're also more of a generic brand. There's lots of issues in terms of just the precedent that can be set if this case moves further with a bad ruling. But this case was thoughtfully brought with the intention of trying to get rid of medication abortion entirely, and there's a real fear that it can do that because of the ruling that has come out of the Fifth Circuit, which is currently on stay, but that's the ruling that is being challenged right now. What happened before was that in 2021, I want to say, 2022, right after the Dobbs decision, so 2022, this case was brought, and the judge that looked at this case was in a district where the plaintiffs knew that if they filed for this lawsuit in this district, they're likely to get this judge, because he's the only judge in this district, he is a Trump appointee, and he is very clearly against abortion access completely. So this was already gamed out from the very beginning, and that lawsuit was challenging the year 2000 approval of mifepristone, the medication that was approved by the FDA, provided by Danco Laboratories. The case was brought 20 years after the approval that was already given by the FDA. So you might be wondering, how in the world can somebody bring this lawsuit 20 years later? I had the same question. I still have the same question. Whether that question is going to be discussed, we will see. But to me, and I'm not the biggest civil procedure expert, I think there's others in this room who may know a lot more, but it just seems like a question as to how can somebody challenge FDA rules and regulations 20 years later. I bring this up because depending on how the Supreme Court rules, we're really seeing not only the fact that a medication abortion might be eradicated or severely limited, but we're also seeing a potential slippery slope effect of just how powerful the FDA is. If the Supreme Court rules or challenges or even brings back some of the restrictions pre-2016, they're completely bringing into question the authority of the Food and Drug Administration. We rely on the FDA to approve all of our medication. We rely on their hearing. We see this, bless you, throughout the time whenever we're trying to access medication. Is this FDA approved? If we no longer trust the FDA, if the Supreme Court is saying we don't trust the FDA to look at the research and to look at the clinical evidence to make its determinations, where does that leave us? What precedence is that setting when it comes to healthcare broadly? So while this is about, bless you, medication abortion, it's about much more than that because it applies to the entire healthcare system. And even though there's only one drug in this situation, it still impacts others, and it impacts other medications down the line, and why it's so important to kind of see what's happening. I'll skip past a lot of the procedural stuff just in the interest of time, but I do want to note just a couple quick things. One is in that decision that came out by Judge Kaczmarek in Texas, he relies on a number of studies in the last 24 hours. If you guys have been following the news cycle, you may have heard that two of the studies that were relied upon in Judge Kaczmarek's opinion were just thrown out from the scientific journal they were published in because they are promoting junk science. They are not rooted in scientific evidence, clinical evidence in any way, so they have been discredited. Well, that's exciting for us because we do not want to promote junk science, and the academic in me is like, thank goodness, this is finally happening. It's frustrating, it's relied upon. Legally speaking, it's not going to be the most helpful. It's good. The Supreme Court is likely not going to care. This is already something that's written into the federal registrar, so not as much of a win legally because we still have bad precedent and there's other things in the opinion, but it is helpful to know that folks are tracking this enough and that at least we have additional claims that this is truly junk science, that the science that they relied upon is not actually scientific. So that's one thing. But then beyond that, Judge Kaczmarek also resurrected a law from the 1800s called the Comstock Act. I am not an expert on the Comstock Act, but I do know that it is wild that it is being brought in this case. DOJ, when they issued their filing for review, did note that there's been a narrow interpretation of Comstock. There's no world in which it should be applied here. It was created to limit you being able to send any obscene materials over the mail. It was never meant for medication abortion. It was not meant to be used in this context. And as DOJ very eloquently put it in their review, it is not meant to be applied in this sort of a case with abortion care. And yet, that is still something that's being considered. And while I'm not an expert on the Comstock Act, we're lucky to be in Massachusetts where there's lots of different academics who are actually focusing on this, a couple notably at Harvard and at BU who are dedicating their time and research to the Comstock Act so we can learn from them. But there is a fear about where that's going to go. And then finally, when it comes to the specific case and where we are right now, so as you mentioned, the case is in front of the Supreme Court. They're going to hear it on March 26th. The posture of the case is such that they are not at this time questioning the initial approval of mifepristone, so that 2000 approval of mifepristone is not being challenged. It's more so the restrictions on being able to access MIFI, so those pre-2016 restrictions. In 2016, they removed a number of restrictions. In 2019, they removed more and then added in another provider. And then in 2021, they increased access even more. That's all of that is now up is in jeopardy because we don't know what the court is going to say. Our office did help draft a amicus brief, so a brief friendly to the court, and we did that in connection with a number of other states' attorneys general. So it's a multi-state effort. We do a lot of multi-state work, especially in the amicus realm. So we worked on that, and that brief is arguing about the need to protect access to medication abortion, about the potential ripple effect this will have not only with the FDA, but also the harms it's going to have on folks trying to access medication care. And then also we just cite to a lot of the scientific evidence that proves how reliable medication abortion is and the fact that the FDA went through its due diligence. Judge Kaczmarek has rhetoric within his opinion that talks about how the FDA has stood in the way and stonewalled the ability for people to challenge its approval. They haven't provided science. None of that is true. There's evidence to prove that isn't true. So we cited back to that and tried to reference really why it's so critical to protect what the FDA has done and then ensure that access to medication abortion remains protected. We have to see where this goes. I think our office is at the same time trying to do what we can with implementation of the SHIELD law, and we're also trying to work with our independent providers to make sure that they understand if we were to be in a situation where we no longer have access to mifepristone, we no longer have access to Danco Laboratories, MIFI, what does this look like? Does this mean we rely more heavily on GenBioPro? Does this mean that we have to look at a misoprostol-only medication abortion regime, which, for those interested, misoprostol, it was the second drug that I mentioned in the current most common form of medication abortion. However, universally across the globe, Most countries use misoprostol only. They do not use mifepristone and miso in combination. So it is safe, it is relied upon, it is different in terms of the side effects you might have and some of the concerns, but we would still be in a world where we can access medication abortion, but the chilling effect it has on the community and on the public will remain. If you hear that this case, that the plaintiffs won, that the alliance won, you automatically will think, I no longer have access to medication abortion. So we're also having to do some public education work, rely on you all and other community members to help spread the word about what still remains accessible. But no matter what, we're doing everything we can with our advocates and with our partners to make sure access to medication abortion remains in Massachusetts. And it's just gonna be a matter of what that looks like and how it happens. So public education, I think, is going to be really critical and beyond just the legal work we'll do. Sorry, that was a much more long-winded answer. This case is taking up a lot of space within our office and just in our minds, so I apologize for so much. If you have follow-up later, happy to follow up on this.
Yeah, I mean, this is huge. And again, with these, when we're hearing this kind of theme of, right, what are the ripple effects of each of these things? It's not just in isolation, its impact on access to abortion care or to reproductive health care in general, but the ripple effects that all of these things have into so many other areas of American life and the institutions of American life that are set up to keep us safe and protected and all of these things. And so the ripple effects they're a little scary. But thank you for elaborating on that. So you mentioned earlier the preview for CPCs. We've heard a little bit. We've been hearing about this over the last couple of months in some of our previous learning sessions. But I'd love to hear, especially for folks who haven't heard, because this is such an important deal. Tell us a little bit more about the crisis pregnancy centers and why are they so harmful? Why they're so difficult to address, to get rid of, and what can we do?
Yeah. So crisis pregnancy centers. Like I mentioned, these are fake pregnancy centers, and I have to say that because that is exactly what they are. What I won't say is that they're not religiously based, because that's not an accurate description. These are Christian Catholic organizations. That is their agenda, and they're driven by this because the entire goal of CPCs, where they first came to be, was to limit anybody's ability to access abortion care. The problem is that they are very well connected, they are very well resourced, they have lots of money, and they're not at all afraid to use it. So this is like a litigious group of people that have built structures, built these organizations that are nonprofit organizations, and the charitable mission that they all carry is furthering the word of their God and making sure that the unborn life is protected. That is the goal for CPCs. Problem is that they're all over the place. In Massachusetts, if the number of abortion clinics and folks and providers that are able to provide abortion care are far fewer than the number of crisis pregnancy centers. And that is not unique to our state. Every state across the country has that same issue. The CPCs double, triple, if not more than that, the number of abortion providers that exist in that state. And they're very clever. They will take names like Your Options Pregnancy, Choices Medical Center. You would think that these are abortion providers because they believe in my choice. They do not. They want you to take their choice. They make the choice for you because they will give you inaccurate information. And these CPCs are positioned very close to abortion providers. Sometimes they're in the same building as an abortion clinic. They'll be right next door to them. The protesters that are in front of abortion clinics are often also connected to the CPC, but not always. But they're a very well-connected group of folks. And once you're inside of a crisis pregnancy center, what you can expect is a pretty terrifying and harrowing experience where you're often shamed for your decisions. You're shamed for your decision to want to have an abortion, to even end up pregnant in the first place if you did not want the pregnancy. And then to be told a lot of religious rhetoric, a lot of rhetoric that will hopefully discourage you. But if that's not enough, then they have even resorted to sometimes looking at ultrasounds and telling you the wrong date of how far along you are in your pregnancy, sometimes giving you inaccurate information. And if all of that doesn't work, on your way out, they will still give you information about abortion pill reversal, which is not scientifically proven, it is not medically accurate, and in fact, it can cause hemorrhages and a lot of medical side effects and issues for the pregnant person. But there's a hotline that they've now established that you can see usually on the side of a CPC. Protesters will hold a number up to it, and they'll make sure to give you information about it on your way out. So lots of issues with crisis pregnancy centers. And you're probably wondering, well, how is this legal? How can they do all of this? How can they deceive people? Because that's ultimately what they're doing. They are deceptive. And this is miseducation, and there should be some sort of legal guide. That's what we thought. That's what we hoped for. But like I mentioned, they're clever, they have money, and they're not afraid to litigate. So we might not have as deep of pockets as they will, and they have really shown that. So the issue in Massachusetts, well, actually, I'll start out with the issue broadly. The issue broadly with CPCs is that they use a little something as a weapon. The First Amendment is the biggest weapon they have at their disposal. They claim that the work that they're doing is in furtherance or an example of their First Amendment right to speech. I've worked at the ACLU. I recognize just how impactful the First Amendment can be. I've also grown to become very frustrated with it because I never thought when I read about it in law school that the First Amendment, or as a journalist where I really looked at it as a way to report on really vital stories, that it could one day be weaponized as a tool that can lie to people and deceive people and keep them from accessing health care. And yet, that's what's happened. Even in the Supreme Court, where a case has come up all the way from California, where folks were required, there was a state law that was going to mandate an information being posted within clinics that explains you can still access abortion care, here's where you can go to access that care, and basically give a disclaimer about what information is provided versus not, and making it really clear that this is a crisis pregnancy center that does not provide abortion care. Here is where else you can go to access that care. Here are your options. A sign that would post something like that within a clinic being mandated, basically having a law that's going to ask a clinic to post that sign, was against the First Amendment. That was an argument that was successful in the Supreme Court. It was successfully made by CPCs. So we know federally that there's a fear, and we have this First Amendment that's going to keep coming up, that's going to be used by the CPCs, and it's going to be hard to challenge them because of those free speech grounds. But then in Massachusetts, they've also taken it a step further, and we rely really heavily on a statute here called 93A. That is the law that we rely on in the AG's office to hold folks accountable for deceptive advertising. So that if you're seeing advertising for example, weight loss medication, and is not at all being used for weight loss medication, and it's telling you that it's going to provide you with this healthcare change or health change, but that's not what it actually does, and it's for something else, we have an avenue to at least pursue that claim and hold folks accountable. You would think with the deceptive advertising that's being used by CPCs, especially when they use names like your choices, pregnancy, your options, we could hold them accountable because they're clearly deceiving folks. They don't believe in your choice or your options. So what's the hang-up? The hang-up is a 1986 case here in the state that limits our very authority to go after no one else but CPCs, where because of them being recognized as a nonprofit, because of them doing work that furthers their charitable mission, whatever that is, we cannot actually hold them accountable because they don't qualify within the confines of the law that is made to hold deceptive advertisers accountable. So it's a bleak legal landscape. We're still doing what we can. This is where I've been very grateful to work with colleagues across the office and really try to flex our creative muscles about what else can we do. Is there a realm to look at nonprofits, to look at charities, to look at privacy, to look at technology, to look at criminal law? We're looking at different avenues of the law to see what have we not touched that is legal that we might be able to do. But we'll see where that goes because we might have to think twice about state resources, about what we might file. We know that they're not going to be afraid to litigate. If we have several council folks across the state of city councilors that have been trying to pass CPC ordinances that would impact how CPCs regulate, but we've been very cautious about supporting those and being able to work closely with them on the language for those ordinances because it's very easy to have something that might be too broad, and we know that the CPCs are not going to wait a minute to file that lawsuit, but do we want to take on that fight? Is it worth the fight? Is the city ready to take on that fight? Is there a way to narrowly tailor the city ordinance? So that's some behind the scenes work that we're engaging in just to make sure that if we're coming up with protections, if we're taking any steps, we know what this means, we know what the ramifications might be, but also how is this furthering the dialogue and the discussion? And we're in this across the country. This is not an issue just here. So we're working within our multi-state coalitions to see what are other states doing, what novel approaches is California taking, Colorado, Illinois, New York, so that we can also work in partnership with them. In the meantime, we're relying very heavily on our other state agencies to work on public education campaigns. So DPH recently put out a very brief guidance talking about CPCs. We're hoping to put out our own guidance when we eventually have a webpage and are able to do more. And then just working with our community partners who are doing this work. Beyond that, and I think we may talk about this later, but I'll bring it up now in the interest of time, A really big way to combat what CPCs are doing is by making sure that our community is armed with the facts and is also coming to the support and rescue of our abortion providers. So the independent clinics I mentioned earlier, they are really hurting and they really need community support to be able to continue providing the services that they're providing, especially given just the numbers of people that show up for CPCs and on behalf of CPCs. So like I mentioned, the protesters that are often outside of abortion clinics or sexual and reproductive health care providers, some of them are directly associated with the CPC. Other times it's just through that network of folks that they know. But there's consistently 10 to 20 people that'll come out on the days that procedural abortions are being performed in Attleboro, for example, and they will come out to protest. Meanwhile, the abortion clinic may have one clinic escort, and that's it. And then there's people that are coming in, the doctors who are trying to provide this care, the nurses who work, the abortion clinic staff that are working there. They all need our protection and our assistance, and the patients who are already in a vulnerable position and scared because they're coming in for a healthcare procedure are scared, and then they're being met with such resistance right at the front lines. So being able to show up for those people, being willing to get trained as a clinic escort is really critical. We are working with a couple different abortion clinics to provide more clinic escort training, to work with some of the providers who have a robust clinic escort program to make sure they're able to provide those trainings to more people. So if you're interested, please get in touch with our office. We'd love to connect you, and we're hoping to build out more of that network. And if you're able to think of other ideas, that would be great, just because the more we can rely on the people power, the same way CPCs have for so long, the more we're going to be able to combat that, because the legal landscape doesn't look great, but we need to do something. And I think showing up for them is going to be a really critical way.
Yeah, I'll add the little note. I had a number of friends in rabbinical school who worked as clinic escorts for abortion providers, and they said it was some of the most meaningful work that they got to do. And just this is my little shot for a PSA as a reminder of remembering that many of these CPCs are using the language of faith to promote a particular narrative around abortion, and that this is the reminder of Repro Shabbat, that Jewish tradition, while it does have a range, as it does with everything, right, of different takes on when abortion is appropriate through consultation with a pregnant person and her support, that Jewish law does firmly stand on the side of providing access to that kind of care, particularly when a mother's life is at risk. This is something that our faith does offer language to say, no, this is something that we do need to protect and care for. So. As we're beginning to wrap up, I just wanted to give that little expansive view. So in addition to fighting for abortion access, what are some of the issues you're prioritizing in your office for this year?
Yeah, so I gave a little preview of that earlier, and I'm going to focus in on one of them in particular, which is maternal health, partially because we have Rep. KCON here, and she's such a great advocate for maternal health. But we're also just in a state where I've been doing this work for a while. I became interested in it when I first researched maternal health care as a journalism student in college, and I was kind of blown away. My family's from India, and I knew that access to maternal health care was not great. One of the reasons why my family wanted to move here and start a life and have me in this country. But I didn't realize how hard it was in the US. And I talk to my mom now as an adult, and just hearing even her story, which I couldn't respect when I was younger because I wasn't aware, didn't care, whatever it might be. But now as an adult, so seeped into this, I was like, wait a minute. Your doctors did not listen to you at all. You had no say in what happened, and your experience is not what I would want if I decided to give birth or go through this process. And it's terrifying that is a story of so many other birthing people. And so I think it's really, really important to recognize that, to recognize the decades of research in this country that show just how dangerous it is to give birth, especially as a Black or a brown person. But honestly, for anyone, depending on where you are in this country, it can be really difficult. And this is now we're talking about wanted pregnancy. So we're not even in that conversation about unwanted pregnancy, which is so much of the language around abortion care, which we need to get rid of anyway. But even when folks want to give birth, and it's something that's desirable, and they're excited, they've built up, they're waiting for this moment, for that to not be a safe experience, for that to be an experience that could take someone's life or their child's life, just is terrifying and beyond me. And especially for where we rank, I think we're the only developed country where it is this dangerous to give birth. So we need to do something about it. And because there's decades of research, I no longer just buy into this. So we need to look into it more. We've looked into it. There have been scholars who've been looking into it. Here in Massachusetts, we have so many brilliant folks. Tufts Medical Center has an entire center dedicated to Black maternal health, and they've been putting out amazing research for years now. IBIS, same thing, also based here. So we have the research, we have the clinical evidence. Now we need the shift in policy. We need the changes in regulation, and we need the changes in the landscape where that care is provided. So we're really active in this space. We're trying to get up to speed on some of the legislative proposals that have been brought. So that's why I'm really grateful for the work that you're doing, Rep. KCON, because there are bills that are specifically looking at making sure that we're expanding the workforce of folks that can provide access to this critical care. We know from years of evidence that midwives are critical to saving lives, and yet our state lags in providing them with protections and expanding access for licensure and for reimbursing them. Right now, midwives provide the exact same level of care, they're performing the same care that a OBGYN would provide, but they're being compensated less than an OBGYN. We are the only state in New England that are reimbursing them at a lower rate than OBGYNs. Every other state now is providing them with the exact same reimbursement. So we need to pass legislation that will make that change. That legislation was reported favorably yesterday, so we're hopeful that it'll keep moving. But then we also need to make sure that we're expanding access when it comes to just the pathways to become a midwife. You can go to nursing school, you can become a nurse midwife, fantastic. But you can also, if you want to be a midwife, you don't want to go to nursing school, but you know this is what you want to do, you can do that. You can do that by becoming a certified professional midwives. These are midwives who are specifically trained to provide midwifery care, that do this work. They don't have to go to nursing school. They're professional midwives, and that is okay because you don't need that nursing training to do this work. And yet, Massachusetts, again, is one of the few states that does not have a path to licensure. We just allow for accreditation, and we have that accreditation set by national standards. But while many of our colleagues in other states have licensure paths for both certified professional midwives and nurse midwives, we don't. So that's a bill that we're still having to push for in the legislature, so I think it would be really great to have your support to make sure that moves forward and really making sure that we're able to expand this care, because this also relates to increasing our ability to have freestanding birth centers. We've really struggled with this in the past. We've had a number of birth center closures in the state. We only have one operating birth center right now, and it's in it's in Northampton. So it's not accessible if someone lives in Boston. They're not going to be able to go there easily to get the care that they need. But a really critical piece to having birth centers is to expand the workforce for who can operate them. And then there's changes in the regulations for birth centers. So we're working in partnership with DPH. They've done some research on their own. They're making some changes to their regs. We're there to make sure that they actually do that and stay true to their word and their recommendations. And then just also working with the community. We've been really grateful to the advocates across the state, the Bay State Birth Coalition, for example, and several other nurse midwives groups to make sure that we're able to increase access. And then AG Campbell also set up a grant in the last year and was able to award money to folks that are doing maternal health work across the state, both doing research and then actually providing care to expand the care that they're providing. So making sure we're providing that funding as well. But maternal health is definitely another area. There's other pieces that I mentioned earlier, so the privacy, family regulatory system, sex ed, infertility, those are all issues we're also tackling, but this is the one I'll focus on.
Amazing. So you mentioned a couple of things over the course of this discussion, different ways that we can support the work that you are doing in the AG's office. We talked about education, we talked about signing up and training to be a clinic escort, all of these different things. Can you just give us the rundown? What are some of the action items that we can be taking, and how can we support the work that you're doing?
Helping with the baskets, the care packages, I think is great, and I can't wait to hear from HealthQ about the impact that it's made. When I heard about it, I thought that was just so powerful. So thank you to all that have done it. Thank you for doing it again. I think that kind of support, showing up for clinics, otherwise, security will be great. And then I think, honestly, there's a lot that you're doing legislatively. This is an informed group, so I think all I would say is just keep at it. Sometimes I feel like it can be discouraging when you don't see the changes happen, when you don't see things happen quickly. What I will say as someone who's been doing this work for a while now is that we're seeing a lot more movement and discussion right now. So just staying involved, staying active, and spreading the word, making sure that the young folks that are in another session right now are looped in and are activated would be great. This is where I'll plug in. We do have youth listening sessions at the AG's office, and so it would be great to be able to bring in some folks from here and from this community to those youth listening sessions. So I'm happy to share share information about that with the folks that have been so great at organizing this night with me, just so that if you'd like to get involved and make sure that your young people are there. I think sex ed is a really important space that we would love to be able to hear their voice, but there's always other issue areas. And so I think activating young people, us hearing from them and them hearing from us, can be a really helpful piece. And then I'm hoping to stay involved in the community and build out more opportunities to meet with folks. So stay engaged. Now you've met the Reproductive Justice Unit at the AG's office. So stay in touch. Stay in touch with the unit and tell them what's going on. If there's ever issues that you're seeing, it's harder for us to know what to investigate if we don't hear from you. So we rely very heavily on folks actually coming to us and trusting us with their experiences. So I hope you can trust me, and I hope that you know that you can reach out to me and just stay activated, because we couldn't do this work without you.
Well, Sapna, we are so grateful for the work that you are doing. We are so grateful that you came and shared all of these incredible updates. You were extremely thorough. Thank you. No, this is so good. I learned so many things.
Yeah.
I'm trying to keep them all in my head. Really, this work is just so incredible, and we are really grateful to have somebody as incredibly competent and passionate as you doing it, so thank you so much. And we have a for like a couple of questions. If there's anything that Sapna didn't cover that is a burning question for you, we would love to hear while we have the opportunity of having her here in the room. Anyone have any questions? Charlie, a question? I'll repeat.
People against abortion, they're for the right to life. But what about the mother? I don't understand how you can be for life, but you don't consider the mother.
Charlie's asking it's hard to understand. It's hard to wrap your head around the concept of not supporting the life of the mother in the case, or of the pregnant person in the case of need for access to abortion. It's a difficult thing to wrap your head around.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and I think you're not alone in trying to reconcile those and grappling with them. I was just at a conference yesterday at BU, actually, where the entire theme for the conference was discussing the pregnant person's right to life. The fact that we have to have a symposium dedicated to this, because it is so niche and just like, wow, what a conversation, is kind of mind-blowing, because this is a living, breathing person who is trying to give life to someone else, and yet, wow, what a novel idea. What about their right? So we're definitely seeing this as an issue. I'll give you like a tidbit, is that within the human rights framework, that right is recognized. But the US has so long not cared what human rights are. We're not a part of what the UN says. We haven't signed on, or ever our legal system doesn't recognize international human rights theories. It's considered soft law. So it's a very different legal landscape, and I think that's what's opened up this kind of area that has been exploited in this abortion context, where you're just like, well, the right to life, how do we define it? Where does it start? Where does it go? So I'm absolutely with you. I think we're entering an arena where we're going to see a lot of even messier conversations around the right to life, as we see more states trying to identify and recognize a right to fetal personhood and what is a fetus's life. And I think that's creating a lot of issues. The fact that there's an argument to be made that if I'm pregnant, I should be able to use the carpool lane because I have another person with me, so that's sufficient. Where does this end? How far does this go? So I think this is a really important dialogue. You're definitely not alone. I'm with you. And I think it's something that we're going to have to just keep seeing. But it's shocking that, again, we're having these issues here in the US. Mexico and Colombia have recognized how important this is. We never usually look to Mexico and Colombia as countries where we're like, oh, look at their human rights laws. They're really fantastic. And yet they get it. They've protected it as recently as this year. So yeah, I think that this is definitely something that we're all trying to better understand.
Right, both within the realm of human rights and within Jewish law. Again, this is the space where Jewish law is exceptionally clear, that the life of the mother takes precedence. The pikuach nefesh, preserving life, top priority within the sphere of Jewish law of halacha, and that a fetus is not recognized as a living creature until it is born. That is a very clear line within Jewish law.
To just add to that, there's scholars who've written papers on this, if you're interested, that are trying to see if there's a way to use Judaism, given how strong the religion is, as a way to use it almost as saying that, well, my freedom to religion recognizes that we should protect life. So how can we use the First Amendment and use that freedom to religion with Judaism as an example to protect life? There's some issues in terms of how that's actually actualized, but there's a lot of scholars doing work in this space, similarly looking at the Establishment Clause. But I'm just saying that, like, this is again why I'm just so grateful to be here with all of you, is I have a lot of respect for this religion because it is written into the religion itself. And I think there's ways that we're trying to think about the manner in which this country is formed, the secular nation we're supposed to be, and yet we have seen religion seep into so many aspects of our laws that restrict access. But we have a religion here who really wants to expand access, recognizes the need for it, recognizes the dignity, and so how can we do that? And there's lots of folks doing some thinking. So be on the lookout, and if you're interested, happy to share some of those scholars' names. But there's just a lot of innovative research happening, and I don't think we could do it if we didn't have such a well-established religion that really has folks that believe it, that showcase it, and that has this written into the rule of law. So I think that's really great.
Thank you. I think I saw a hand over here. I'm going to take this one first.
We talked so many times about how lucky we are to live in Massachusetts and to have our family and our daughters in a state like this. Can you tell us a little bit about what's happening sort of on a national picture? What efforts are being made in order to protect this, protect abortion rights and reproductive justice at a national level? Is there similar national movements on our side?
Yeah.
The question to repeat is, we heard a little more specifically about Massachusetts, but the national landscape, how does this fit in?
Yeah, and I think this was something that came up earlier in the remarks during the service about right now it very much depends on what state you're in. If you're in a red state or if you're in a blue state, that's basically determining your access to abortion care. And unfortunately, that is like largely the reality. It really does depend on where you are. At the federal level, there are lots of things truly that Congress could do. There are things that Congress could do to protect what the FDA has done and their authority. There are things that they can do to enshrine the right to abortion or reproductive health care more broadly within the federal landscape. But we're not seeing that movement yet. We're not seeing as much of that activation happening. So I think in that sense, let's see. I'm not going to lose out complete hope because sometimes Congress will pass something that's helpful, but it is a lot harder. It's harder to see that movement, especially when we've been in this. We've kind of set 50 years of precedent that allows for abortion to be dealt with at the state level. We have a patchwork system, and it's not only abortion. Privacy is my other area. We deal with privacy the same way. There's nothing happening in a meaningful way at the federal level. It's all being dealt with at the state level, and states want to retain some level of autonomy. So there is that struggle between what's happening nationally and what's happening at the states. I think what Dobbs has done is it's activated a lot more people than before. As someone who's been in this space for a while, before the Dobbs decision, it was much harder for me to have these conversations with friends and family members elsewhere, with folks who don't do any type of repro work to just get them engaged. But once the Dobbs decision happened, I remember I got texts from friends being like, I want to do more. How can I do more to help? What can we do to volunteer and to do more? I'm like, well, this is what I do every day, so let's chat. Let's see what else we can do. So I think that's been exciting, is to just see more of that activation. I've seen more and more stories, and I've talked to more and more people who maybe had a different view on access to abortion before than they do now, because they're seeing how much harder it is. I said my family's from Missouri, and as someone who went to school there, went to law school there, I saw firsthand how difficult it can be to access care in a state where abortion was severely restricted at that time. Now you just can't access it whatsoever. And I would always have to help folks drive into Illinois to get access to care. When I was working in Chicago, I would drive down to provide minors who needed access to abortion care with a judicial bypass, which meant that they needed to get access to an abortion, so they had to get to Illinois. But even before that, Illinois at that time had a parental notification law, meaning they had to tell their parents that they want to get access to an abortion. Or they could go in front of a judge and share their most intimate secrets and histories to be able to get access to this care. So I have had to help those people. Those laws are now increasing, the parental notification laws, or we're just seeing full-on restrictions to abortion care that's causing people to travel even further, or figure out clever ways to get access to medication abortion, which can be hard, even if it's done through telehealth. How can you do that as a 16-year-old living at home with your parents, on your parents' health insurance, on their cell phone plan? So I think those challenges are all existing, and I think if we're in a red state, just imagine that any issues you've talk to people about it within Massachusetts are magnified because they have no access within the four walls of their state. They have to go elsewhere or reach out to people elsewhere. The distances people are traveling are longer. And even in protective states, and I'm sure HealthQ can talk about this, is that because we're seeing not as much in Massachusetts, but because of some states of where they're situated, so Illinois is a good example, because more and more people are traveling from out of state, the wait times for people even within the state trying to access abortion care is increasing. If you get rid of a medication abortion, the number of procedural abortions will have to go up, meaning that that wait time, which has already grown from, say, a week to 3 weeks or 4 weeks, will likely go up to 10 weeks because it's just so many people. 10 weeks, we're then battling, well, how long can you go to actually access abortion care? This is one way in which Massachusetts lags. We actually we cap how far abortion can go, so we actually have it in our laws 24 weeks. There are states who just have a blanket protection for abortion care, so just noting that there's work to do here. But yeah, so there's work happening. I'd say I'm not as hopeful at the national level as I would like to be. Let's see what happens. I've not lost all hope, but the states that are really activated, I think we've been blue states have been very creative. Protective states have recognized our responsibility to do a lot more than just protect access, but enhance access. So that's really what I'm looking out for, because it's not fair to our neighbors in red states to not be able to get the care that they need. And sorry, I want to give time for the last question too.
Yeah, I was just saying, in the interest of time, I might have to move us ahead one step, but if you wouldn't mind staying for a few minutes,
Yeah.
and if folks have other questions, thank you. So let's just begin with a huge amount of gratitude, Sapna, for the work that you're doing and also for coming to speak to us. Thank you so much. All right. Beautiful. And as you alluded to, I'd love to hear from Christy a little bit more of what's going on with our Javiloti poll impact at HealthQ and what else is going on. So I'm going to invite you on up and give you a microphone. You're getting a microphone already. Perfect. All right. I'm going to take my seat.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. Thank you for having me last year. Thank you for participating in the abortion care packages. Thank you for sharing what you shared tonight. It's always nice to sort of hear the support that we have on a legislative and a community level when you're in doing the healthcare every day and just sort of seeing all of the navigation that folks have to do. You can get mired in the day-to-day. But knowing that we have support and that we're in a state that is supportive is very helpful. I want to talk about two things just to sort of keep some of the realness before I talk about the care packages. If you were here last year, you know I like data and I like making it real. So I want to share that in Massachusetts in 2022, which is the most recent time that we have data for, 17,757 abortions were done in Massachusetts. So when we're protecting access to abortion, it is for a lot of people. 17,757 in 2022. And that was an increase of 962 from the year before. When I looked at the state, because a lot of people ask about, like, are a lot of people coming into the state, especially because of the Supreme Court decision. In 2022, that was for half of the year because of the decision was made in June. We know that we saw 128 more out-of-state people in 2022 than in 2021. But we saw 920 people of the 17,000 from out of the state. Some were from New Hampshire or from Rhode Island, so they're close by and they're coming from out of state. But our clinic, HealthQ, which is in Beverly, Lawrence, and Haverhill, so the North Shore and the Merrimack Valley, saw people from Florida, from Texas, from Georgia, from the states where they're trying to get access that they have no access. One of the people that came to us from Florida came because she knew she could take a flight in the morning, get to the health center, have the abortion, and still fly home that same day. She had arranged everything knowing that that time frame and the cost and everything was going to work for her. We had a person come from Texas, and they came because they had somebody that they had living in the state of Massachusetts that they could stay with. So there was an easier travel, an easier reason to say that they were leaving their state for them to access the care at our health center. Most, I would say, are accessing the care in Boston, but people are still coming out to the suburbs, if you will, because we may be the easiest access for them. So what do the care packages mean? We love them. We love them, we love them. They're actually gone. So Amiel and I had a reaction when we went into dinner and seeing them at the center of the table. We were like, the bags! We love that they're colorful. We love that they're not identifiable, right? That they're just sort of a general bag. And the reaction, I would say, actually, I'm gonna be completely honest. In the beginning, my staff were like, oh my gosh, another thing for us to remember to do. It took maybe 3 weeks to get rid of that reaction because they were like, oh my gosh, everybody's so grateful to be handed a bag. When I talked with Edith and Meredith and Abigail, thank you so much for coordinating it as well, we were asking how many could we use, what was feasible and reasonable, and we decided we were going to give them to our surgical patients, so the ones that were coming into the clinic to have procedures. And we did 1,700 procedures last year, or not procedures, abortions. 52% of them are medication abortions. We met about that number, right? The bags are gone, of giving them to our procedural patients. And the reactions have been anything from shock and humbleness of like, I don't think I should take this, like I don't deserve it, to just severe gratitude. And Amiel, who's with me today, and please ask questions of both of us after we leave. Amiel is the RN in the recovery room, shared a story that a person had looked through the bag and they were like, ooh, treats, yay. Ooh, pads, yay. But when they saw the note, the handwritten note, their whole demeanor changed of like, somebody cares about me. It was like reading "You are beautiful" or "You are loved" and really taking that in, and it changed that person's whole demeanor. So that is the overall reaction that we're getting to them. We had Temple Beth Elohim participate, Temple Shalom, and Edith, I don't remember the one out in the west part of the state. Yes, had participated. So that's how we really filled the number to be able to provide our procedural abortion patients with the bags. Another thing I'll suggest may be nice or cool, I don't know. I did also apologize to the person, but outside of the clinic, because the ones that you all gave us were this funky blue that matched our logo, there was somebody sitting outside of the health center one day with that bag, and I heard them speaking in a non-English language with a partner, and I was like, it sort of seems like they're talking like they might have a question. And I know those are one of my bags. So I think that they were just in getting medication abortion information and maybe have some questions or something. And I stopped and I just said, I'm sorry, but I recognize the bag. I'm the director. Do you have any questions? And they did wind up having a conversation with me because partners aren't allowed into the back of the clinic. So it was also just a nice, like, not identifier, but an identifier that allowed somebody to get more help. And for me, that just was really something special. So thank you very much for doing that. I think, getting more would be wonderful, but what we were able to provide, and if we could do it again, the staff who were like, oh my gosh, what do we do with this? One more task. We're like, where are the bags? Why can't we find the bags? And I'm like, we're all out. And they're like, what are we gonna do? So we're really excited for when we get more and be able to hand them out to our patients again. And I also want to add so many things I had taken notes of what you were speaking to. I love the timing of this. Next week is Ash Wednesday. For those of us in abortion care, it does not matter what religion we are, we pay attention to that day because it's the start of the 40 Days of Life campaign that we will have protesters outside of our clinic every single day for 40 days. So the timing of me being able to share with the staff, right, that this is happening from a community that really supports us, it does mean a lot to the staff. I know we're giving something to the patients, but it's coming from community, and it feels good to the staff to be able to give something that's not necessarily from us, and that really is truly a gift to that person. We're giving them medical care, and we're giving them love and compassion and all of that good stuff. But this is really like, here's a gift to say that you are special and what you are doing is not wrong. And if you had to go through the people who have the signs outside that are ugly, thank you for being here, and you're taking care of you. So thank you for helping us do that.
Christy, thank you so much for the work that you are doing as well in providing direct service to so many people from both our state and outside of our state who are coming in and seeking the care that they need and that they deserve. And so thank you so much. And this is the launch of the second round of the Javilo Tipol project. So if you are feeling moved and inspired, please, this is as you can hear, a really meaningful, impactful way to do something. It's hard, right, when you hear, there's so much happening, there's so little that we might be able to personally impact, but this is a place where you really can jump in and make a difference for somebody in a way that really matters and elevates their dignity, which is, again, another core principle of Jewish law and values and practice. So thank you, and thank you for your time. I want to just see if we have any closing remarks that we'd like to make. In that case, I'm just going to end with a prayer. This is from from the National Council of Jewish Women. This is the group that organizes Repro Shabbat. They put this out into the the ether, and I thought it was beautiful, and this is a way for us to close together. So this is a prayer for reproductive freedom, again, from our National Council of Jewish Women. May we always remember that each person is created in the image of the sacred, endowed with the inherent right to autonomy and respect. May we create a caring and loving community, a nation that reveres this dignity within each of us. May we understand our obligations to one another, as we are inherently holy and should be treated as such. May we find within ourselves the collective will to create a just society in which reproductive justice is foundational. May we endow each other with the strength, resolve, and courage we need as we walk together towards a liberatory world. May we always follow the leadership of those most impacted by the harms of reproductive oppression. May we listen and learn. And may our country become a place of true liberty and justice for all. May our relationships with each other be ones of care and deep respect. May we walk together on the path of community as we work together to ensure truly accessible abortion care for all. And we can add our voices with an amen. Amen. So thank you all again so much for being here. Thank you, Abby and Meredith, to Sapna, to Christy. Thank you all so much. We'll be sticking around for a couple minutes if you have questions. And we hope you have a beautiful evening. Shabbat Shalom. Chodesh Tov.